Yep. Good evening, everyone. So you designed that example, finish. You created that end-to-end example, huh? Everyone? No. So the complete example, if you have any doubts on that till now, we can solve. Everything working? Have you practiced the complete example? All options are working. Yeah. Not started. So because see seriously, if you are looking for some interviews to crack or jobs, then these are the types of tasks they give and you can't handle. If you are simply just learning React only just for learning, then you don't practice, it's okay. Because practically you can't handle the designs they give. So because companies, what they do is, even selected as a React project for at least 1-2 months, if there is time for project, they will give you continuous tasks every day. And based on the performance of you on those tasks, they will decide whether to continue or not. That is the reason sometimes even you got the React, until or unless you start on project, job is not guaranteed. Because if they are not satisfied with your skills, like tasks, what they are giving, you are unable to do, then they can't entertain you. Right? That is very common even for experienced people also. Because even today, several experienced people join on React in various companies, and they come and ask regularly that, sir, today they given this task to me, how to do it, right? So you need to practice this, then you will get perfection. Yesterday we implemented one concept. What is it? Cookies. So by using cookies, we can authenticate the routes. Authentication means everybody cannot access the routes. Only people who have successfully logged in, they can access. For that, one important concept we discussed about cookies, working with cookies. Next important after the cookies concept, because that comes under part of state management. Here, two more things are there. After you know the cookies, similarly, you have some other state management techniques. Actually, React 18 provides some hooks called use context. So it is a hook. So what is cookie? What is the concept of cookie? Yesterday we discussed. Cookie is related to memory. It is a simple file which is storing the client details in the client memory. So in that cookie memory will be available for the application until it is removed from the browser or it is removed from the client device. Because if cookies are defined with expiry, they will not delete until the expiry date. If you want in between, you manually you can delete it. Right? Actually, React 18 new versions provided some more techniques for storing the data and using it for components. Actually, why we used state management? Why we used cookies? Because it is a stateless protocol to maintain data and use across requests. We used these techniques. I told you that we have session storage, local storage also. What is context? Actually, React 18 provides this context. Context is the memory allocated a component for a component. So which is accessible to all other components that run within within the context of current component. That is the memory actually. We have a context memory. What is advantage of this context memory is we can use this memory across requests. This memory is available across the requests. The memory allocated for one context of component is accessible to others. It's just like in JavaScript, you have closure, function closure. What is a closure in JavaScript? What is a closure in JavaScript? What is a closure? A closure allows outer function to share its data to the inner functions. That means the members of outer function are accessible to inner functions. That is actually context. For example, what is the context memory means? Roughly, I will show a diagram here. Suppose we have a parent component. Now, in this component, you have a child component. That means we have a child component inside the parent, we have child. In that child component, there can be another child component. There can be another child component like this. Now, what happens is in the parent component, some data is present. In the parent component, some data is present. You maintained some state. In that state, you stored some data. And you can use that data inside the parent component. Now, the question is, can we access the state of parent component in child? Can we access the state of parent component in child? It's not possible. It's not possible. Every component have its own state. And the state of one component is not accessible to others. That means even if it is a child component, it cannot access the data of parent. Then how? We need some data to pass from parent to child. Then how we can pass? How to transport data from one component to another? That is the requirement. So Is the state of one component accessible to another component? It is not possible. If it is not possible, then how we can access? Then what happens is, actually this data is configured in state. Instead of keeping a state, what parent component can do is, this parent component can maintain a memory. This memory is called context memory. You can create this memory by using actually create context. By using create context, you can create this context memory. There is a create context method. By using that create context method, you can create context memory. What is speciality of this memory? The specialty of this memory is nothing but this memory is accessible to all the child components that are running in parent. That is the concept. That means, suppose somebody entered user ID in first component, parent. After entering, that user ID must be maintained in all child components. But the data of parent is not accessible to child. Then for that, we use this context. That means, first we need to create context memory. We need to design the context memory, keep some data inside that memory. After that, we need to access this data in the child. And to access the data in child, you need a hook called use context. Use context is the hook. By using this hook, you can access the data and you can use it. So we need two steps. One is create context. Another one is use context. So what is difference between state and context? Both are memories for a component. Difference is state is accessible only to current component, but context is accessible to all the components that run inside this component. Remember, suppose if a component is outside this parent, that means this is another component. This is another component. So it cannot access this context. It's not possible. So context is the memory. It is accessible to the child. If they are working outside the context, they cannot access that components. This is the context memory actually. So what is the intention of context memory? To keep the data so that it is accessible to all the child. Actually, this context, it uses DI mechanism, dependency injection mechanism. It uses DI mechanism, dependency injection mechanism. What is this dependency injection mechanism means? Actually, so DI requires two components. One is yesterday I explained, provider. Another one is injector. We need two components, provider and injector. What is the role of provider? Yesterday I told you one point about provider and injectors. What is the role of provider? Provider is responsible for locating your value in memory. Yesterday we used cookie provider. That cookie provider is responsible for searching where the cookie is present in the memory. That means a provider is responsible for looking for the values in memory. So where is the context memory and what data is present in context memory? That is defined by using provider. Provider is for that. So what is this provider? Provider is a component of DI, dependency injection, which is responsible for locating a value in memory. It is a component of DI which is responsible for locating a value in memory. And injector is a component of DI which is responsible for injecting the value into component so that it can be accessed and used in application. So that it can be accessed and used in component. Actually you can use in component. That's what actually the point. So context is the memory of parent which is made available to the child. In simple terms, that is the definition. Context is the memory of parent available to its child. Context is the memory of parent available to its child. That is the concept actually. So how this works, one simple example I will show you. First, what we have to do, we have to create a context. Then we have to access the context. So let's see the steps here, how to define this. First, create a new context memory. How is let context is equal to react dot create context. We have create context and it is initially null. Null means there is no value inside. So the memory is created. So you can give any name for the context. Any name you can give. I just given roughly context. So in that context, you can store any data. So this is first creating a context. After creating the context, so we have to store some data in the context. This is creating. After that, second step, you have to configure the provider for context. So we have to define the provider in this way. So we have context dot provider. Like this we have to write. Usually provider has some value. Whatever data you want, you can store. We have context provider. And remember, all child components here. You have to keep them here. Make sure that all the components are running inside this block. Just like yesterday you saw cookie provider. So this is cookie provider. Cookies are available only for the components which are mentioned inside cookie provider. So context is also available. Context contains some data. Where is the data present? Data is present as a value. The value of context is provided to the components which are running inside the context. If any component is outside this context provider, they cannot access. So the context memory is available only for the components which are running inside this context. Now, how child components can access? That means what? Child components. So child components can access the context value and use. How? We have to create a reference constant, some CTC context. I'll say context txt. Okay, context is equal to use context. Use context, we have to mention the context name. Which context you want to access, that name. That means now whatever value you stored in the context, that is accessible now. How to access the value? By using use context. After accessing the value, that means that value is now accessible with reference of ctext, right? That means just you have to use, so ctext dot whatever the context value is there, you can access. So 3 stages will be there. One is first stage, you create the context. Second stage, you define the provider for context. And third, you provide the access. That means you can access. This is injector. I already told you that all the hooks are considered as injectors in DI mechanism. They are all injectors. So that is the context here. Let's see how this works. Means how we can access inside, right? Let's check. I will create a sample example for that. We will keep this aside. I will close all this. I will create a separate component for your understanding sake. I will create a new comp called context demo. I will add a new file context demo.jsx. Here I am creating, so export function context demo. I will create a simple hierarchy so that you can understand. So we have a simple container fluid. Okay. So in this, we will design one component. Suppose I will keep a heading. This is as index component. We have index component. This is the parent component. We have a index component which is parent. Now what is here itself? I will create another component by name home. Home component I am creating. So return a simple presentation. And here I will keep a heading, some home component. Okay, we will access the home component inside this index. Component access in component, another component export function. This is, suppose we are having like videos component, and we have just a simple container head. This is videos component. This videos component we are accessing in home component. We are accessing that in the home component. Now, what is the hierarchy here? We have a index. In index, we have home. In the home, we have videos. That means 3 levels are there. That means what is the hierarchy here is at the out, which component is there? Index. Inside the index, which component is running? Home component is running. Inside the home component, another component is running. That is what? Videos. That is the hierarchy. Now, what is our point is, whatever data you store in index, it should be available to home and videos. That is the basic hierarchy we want to follow. Then if you create a state in index and try to access the state in home and videos, not available. State is only for that particular component. So it is not accessible outside. Then what we have to do? We have to create a context. We have to create context. So this is first I will keep in the startup. That means I will go to index.js temporarily here. I will put what context demo. So we have to import now. Context demo. From where? From dot slash. This is in the project. This is a different folder. We have components. In components, which one? Context demo. That is the component. Okay. Now we will access context demo here. The context demo component is available. Some problem? Context demo is not there. All are present in home only, right? Why it is not available? Okay, now it is there. Now in this component, let's keep the hierarchy. Index component, I will keep this as padding 4, margin 2, and BG, suppose some dark. I'm giving less. And this is the parent component, text white. Okay, this is the index component. In the index component, we are having home component. So I will give class. So BG some warning, and that's it. And you can see this is home component. This have padding 4. That is home component. In that home component, we have videos component. So class name BG danger and padding 4. This is videos. That is the hierarchy of components we are having. Now we need to transport data from the index component to home and videos. That means we will do one thing. Create a simple text box here. We will keep a div class margin bottom 4, and here we will define a text box. Input type is text. And here I said, so username. I just given a text box here. That is username. And when username is entered, and I use a button here, suppose like login, like this. Username and login button is there. BTN primary. Okay. And when user clicks on this button, after entering the name, that name should be displayed in home and it should be displayed in video. That means we need to transport the data from the parent to here, to child components. Then generally what we do, how to collect the data? How do we collect the data coming from the parent? Whatever data comes in parent, you generally store in a state. But that state is not accessible to others. That is the point we are discussing. So to make it available to child component, we will create a context. So what we will do here, we will create a context here. I'm keeping all in one file just for your understanding sake. What you can do, you can create separate files. One home component, one video component, and you can import and use them. Right? Here I'm importing. First, we have to import create context. From React library, we have to import create context. And from there, we have to import another one is use context. Use context also we have to import. Now we need to create a context memory. Means we need to create a context memory. Remember, you can simply treat it as global memory, because you know if it is to be accessed in everywhere. Already we know na JavaScript, how a value is accessible to all functions. Because every variable that you declare is function scope. What is difference between var, let, const? Var is function scope, let and const are block scope. That means the maximum scope is function. Then how you will access in all functions? Then you have to create a global variable. So we are creating here users context. That is what I am giving. Or user details context. That is the context name. And how we can make it like a context? By using React dot create context. We have to use React dot create context. If you are using React dot create context, you don't need to import here. Directly we can access from React dot create context. Right? So we can directly use that here. React dot create context, because React you have to use, this is a class and it is present in which location, it is a member of what. So create context and what is the default value? Default value is null. That is how we create the context. After creating the context, now what we have to do? We need to configure a provider. React is not imported. So we have to import what? React. We need to configure React also. That will be fine. Okay. Now we are accessing create context. We are creating a context memory. What is the context memory name? User details context. Now this memory is used by provider. Means provider mentions the scope of the memory, where it should start and where it should end. What is the scope of this memory? We will go context demo. So this is the scope. In this context demo, whatever components are coming, those components can use the context memory. So here you have to create a user details context. User details context. Actually, it uses a provider. It doesn't requires like we have to configure the provider name like this. This is provider. In this provider, you have to keep all your components. Home component is running. Home component is running inside the context. So it can const. And in component videos now context is as well as it is available to the videos because inside home videos is running. So at any level you can access. And what is the value? What is the value? We have to define the value. What is the value for this component? We will define value is nothing but it is an object which contains user name. What should be the username? Username coming from text box. Whatever you come collect and store inside the context memory, so that it is inside the context. That means now how to collect the details. We have to write here what on change. On change is handle name change. Okay. Let me write a function here, handle name change. We have to collect the value E. We will create consist username, set username. It is actually use state. We have to import state and state is an object. Actually, just we will just mention that simple detail username. Now, what is that username we have to do? We need e dot target dot value. We have to collect that. After collecting the value, what we have to do? We have to set that username into the context memory. So I am not waiting for login button. Directly I am writing on change. On change means then here directly we will apply the username coming from state. That means now what happens? A context memory is created. The context memory contains an object. Object, we have a property called username. This username contains the value coming from text box. Now you don't need this button because you can write on button click if you want. I don't want any button. While writing itself, I need to transfer the data to others. That you entered here, whatever data you you are entering here. So still finished. We are not reading the context. So the context is created. What is the context we are creating? It context. This is what defined. Okay. Now we need to access the context and use it in our home page. How to access the context in the home page? How to access in the home page? We have to create a constant. So context some name as text is equal to use context. Which context it should use? It is expecting the context name. It is expecting the context name. Context name is what? Context name is what? User details context. That means in that context, whatever data is there, you can access using. So in this details context, what data is in that object? What is the property we are having? Username. That means this context is object type now. In that there is a username. I want to display the username here. Then we will just what username. We are accessing the username here. So we are accessing here. In videos component also we want to access. That we have to do in videos component, we have to create a context and use context. Which context it should use? User details context. Now here we can access video component. Here I will access context dot what? User name. That is the property. Whatever you entered, it is accessible there. Some problem. Let's see what is the problem. So this is having a React. We have a create context method directly. We have a create context and context default value is what? Null. I don't need this now because it is already imported there. Now this is fine. Now you can see, you can write in one line also. Create text is there. Fine. Now I am clicking here and I am typing which component you are typing in index. And it should be accessible. This context memory. Directly state is not accessible like that. That means if you defined a state, it is accessible only inside that component, not to others, not even to child. Now we created a context memory and this context memory allows to access to child. So what is the difference between cookie and context? Cookie can be, cookie can make the data available to other components which are not child components, some other components. That means you can access from any component. In context only by the concepts which are run inside the context of current component. Parent, inside the parent, which components are working. Only those components can use this, right? That is the concept of context memory. So these days in React, we don't need to depend on this. So in latest React, they provided some hooks which will allow you to handle so many functionalities without third party also. Especially in terms of perform stations and but for